Amidst the ancient city of Samarkand, in the silent darkness of the Gur-e-Amir mausoleum, a group of Soviet scientists stooped before a heavy stone slab. As the dust of ages was wiped away, carved inscriptions appeared, chilling and haunting 3 days later. At dawn on June 22, 1941, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, opening the invasion of the Soviet Union, one of the bloodiest campaigns in human history. Was it just a coincidence, or a curse from a figure who had been dead for over 5 centuries? That certainly the name associated with that curse had spread fear from India to the Mediterranean, from the Caucasus Mountains to the vast Russian steppes. They called him Timur, or as the West came to know him, Tamerlane, a lame king, but a military genius who never knew defeat. A builder who turned the city of Samarkand into the jewel of the East, but who also erected towers from the skulls of his enemies. So who was he, really a bloodthirsty monster, a brilliant creator, or a living paradox of history? Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host for World History. Today, we will step into the chaotic 14th century, where a man from a small tribe in Central Asia dared to dream of re-establishing the Mongol Empire, but in his own way, with sword and a sea of blood. Join me as we begin this journey. A curse from the tomb, a chilling beginning. Let me take you back to a sweltering afternoon in the summer of 1941. In Samarkand, the jewel of Central Asia, once the capital of glorious empires, a team of Soviet scientists entered the Gur-e-Amir mausoleum. They were not pilgrims, but anthropologists, working under the direct orders of Joseph Stalin. In wartime, not even the tomb of a king dead for 500 years could escape the cold scrutiny of science and power. The head of the team, Mikhail Gerasimov, was a renowned anthropologist. He pioneered the technique of facial reconstruction from skulls, a skill that interested Stalin, as it could bring to life the appearance of great figures from history. And so they came here to open the coffin of Timur Lenk, or as the West called him, Tamerlane. As the dust of ages was swept away, an inscription in old Persian carved on the tombstone was revealed. These words were nothing less than a warning. When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble. Whoever disturbs my tomb will unleash an invader more terrible than I. The people of Samarkand had long passed down this story. Local clerics begged the scientific team to leave him to his eternal rest. But the orders from Moscow allowed for no delay, and on the night of June 20th, 1941, the heavy lid of Timurandapus' coffin was lifted. Inside lay the skeleton of a tall man, broad-chested, with wounds on his right leg and arm still scarred into the bone. There was no doubt this was the man who had once spread terror across Asia in the 14th century, and then just 2 days later, at 3:00 a.m. on June 22nd, the world shook. Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, sending 3 million Nazi troops pouring into the Soviet Union. It was the largest invasion in human history, the beginning of bloody battles that would claim tens of millions of lives. A coincidence, certainly, but I tend to pass hard not to feel a chill when remembering the curse on the tomb and the catastrophe that followed immediately after. The people of Samarkand whispered Tamerlane had truly risen, not in the flesh, but as a timeless warning. This story, though mixed with mystery, holds profound historical value. It shows that even after centuries, the name Tamerlane is still associated with fear, with destruction, with the image of a man whose power and cruelty posterity can never forget. But before we delve into the bloody campaigns, before we hear about the towers built from tens of thousands of human skulls, we must return to the beginning to understand why a lame shepherd became the obsession of both the Islamic world and the West. Please join me as we open the pages of history where legend and history intertwine, where the curse from the tomb is merely a gateway to a long journey, the life and legacy of Timur. The world shattered after Genghis Khan. More than a century before Tamerlane's birth, Genghis Khan and his sons had built the largest contiguous empire in human history, stretching from the shores of the Yellow Sea to the Black Sea. But by the mid-14th century, that legacy was no longer a unified entity. After the death of the great Khans, the Mongol Empire split into several Khanates: the Golden Horde in the Russian steppes, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Yuan dynasty in China. Initially, they still recognized the symbolic authority of a great Khan, but central power gradually faded. By the 14th century, each Khanate was its own world, often at war with one another over territory, honor, and interests. With this fragmentation, there was no longer a single Mongol storm, but rather many smaller tempests, destroying each other. This was the context into which Timur, a Turco-Mongol boy in Transoxiana, would be born. Central Asia, the land of the oases of Samarkand, Bukhara, and Kesh, was the crossroads of the Silk Road. Persian, Arab, and Chinese merchants once bustled through, but by the 14th century, after the decline of the Mongols, banditry and chaos reigned. Minor Khans vied for power with constant changes of rulers, trade stagnated, and farmers and city dwellers lived in insecurity. Disease spread. The Black Death moved from west to east, claiming millions of lives, further unsettling Pieplindapus hearts. It was a lawless world where the strong survived and the weak were trampled. And in this chaos, those with leadership skills who knew how to seize opportunities could build an empire. It is crucial to understand that the value system of that era was vastly different from ours today. In a fractured world, the desire for a strong man to restore order was immense. Tribal chiefs, Muslim warlords, and even common people longed for an iron hand strong enough to both protect and dominate. That is why, when a figure like Timur appeared, both ruthless and wise, people were both terrified and willing to follow him. To them, in the midst of chaos, a brutal but decisive conqueror was better than endless division and turmoil. Alongside these upheavals, history also records contemporary figures. They were witnesses to a bloody era. In the Middle East, the Ilkhanate dynasty in Persia was fading, and Persian principalities were in conflict. In Russia and Eastern Europe, the Russian principalities had to pay tribute to the Golden Horde, but the Golden Horde itself was internally fractured. In China, the Mongol Yuan dynasty weakened, and the Han people rose up, preparing for the emergence of the Ming dynasty. And in the Mediterranean, the Ottoman Empire was on the rise, threatening Constantinople. All these pieces together form a picture, a world waiting for a hand to reshape it. The 14th century was not only a time of destruction, was also the source of major transformations. To come, the disintegration of the Mongol Khanates put an end to the Pax Mongolica. The era on the Silk Road was safe and prosperous. East-west trade was disrupted, forcing Europe later to seek sea routes to India and China ushering in the age of discovery. The power vacuums in Central Asia became a springboard for an individual like Timur, who would place himself in the position of heir to Genghis Khan. Looking at that historical picture, it becomes clear without the collapse of the Mongol Empire, without the chaos and power vacuum, there would never have been a Timur. He was born into collapse, grew up in chaos, and it was these circumstances that turned him into the most brutal conqueror of the century. And now, having understood that shattered world, we will delve into the next part, the journey of a youth who bore the name Timur, meaning iron, and the ambition that was forged early in blood and fire. The youth of the Iron Man forging an ambition. The 14th century was a shattered age. Then fate chose a boy to be born at that very moment. In 1336, in the region of Keshnau-Shahrazabs in Uzbekistan, a child was born into the Barlas tribe. They named him Timur, which means iron in Turkic. And as destiny would have it, his life would be a testament to a will as hard as steel. Never yielding, Timur was not a prince of a court. The Barlas clan were descendants of Mongol soldiers who had settled in Transoxiana, gradually intermarrying with the local Turkic people. His father, Tarakai, was a respected tribal leader, but not powerful enough to dream of a throne. In a world obsessed with the bloodline of Genghis Khan, Timur-Dapus' origins were a limitation. He could not proclaim himself Great Khan. He had no right to inherit the Mongol throne. This, which seemed a disadvantage, became a burning motivation. If he could not rely on blood, he would prove his worth through conquest. Timur-Dapus' childhood is not well documented, but what we know reveals a life of early encounters with danger. He participated in livestock raids, a common practice for survival on the steppes. In one clash, he was struck by arrows in his right arm and right leg, leaving him permanently injured. From then on, Timur walked with a limp for the rest of his life. The name Timur-Ilang Timur, the lame, became attached to him, and in English, it evolved into Tamerlane. But this adversity did not weaken him. On the contrary, it forged in the bow a steely character, never backing down from any obstacle. It is said that Timur had a strange charisma, with cold eyes but words that could persuade others to follow him to the very end. As a young man, Timur joined the conflicts between the minor emirs in Transoxiana. Initially, he was a mercenary, a cunning brigand. But he soon learned the lesson of survival. To endure, one must be both ruthless and wise. He married Princess Sari-Mulk Khanum, a descendant of Genghis Khan. This was not just a marriage, but a political move. Through this connection, Timur could claim the title son-in-law of the line of Genghis Khan, indirectly placing himself in a more legitimate position than other warlords. This is a crucial detail. Timur was not just a cold-blooded warrior, he was a master political player, understanding that to ascend to power, one needs more than just swords, one needs legitimacy. From a minor warlord, Timur gradually gathered a group of loyal warriors around him. They followed him not just for money or spoils, but because of his charisma and command. He instilled in them a simple yet harsh philosophy: ever forgive a traitor. Fear is a more effective weapon than 1,000 swords. Loyalty is nurtured by both victory and generosity. After victory, in those years, Timur built his first war machine, laying the foundation for his later career. What makes Timur-Dapus' youth important is not just the wounds or the raids. It is that all the adversity carved a soul of steel within him. He was lame, but not broken. He lacked noble blood that compensated with limitless ambition. He emerged from chaos only to turn chaos into his tool. If Genghis Khan began from the poverty of the Mongolian steppes, Timur began from the disintegration of a Mongol world that had passed. And in that, we see he did not just follow the past, but wanted to surpass it to build a new empire bearing his own unique mark. Looking back at that youth, we see the portrait of an extraordinary individual, a cripple of no royal descent, but with a dream in his fiery heart larger than the steppe sky. That dream would soon explode in the blood and fire of Central Asia, elevating him from a tribal chief to the lord of Samarkand. Samarkand, capital of an imperial dream. It is difficult to separate the image of Timur from Samarkand, the blue jewel in the heart of the Central Asian desert. If the steppes forged the ambition of the Iron Man, then Samarkand was where that ambition was transformed into a tangible empire. Samarkand was already a legendary city for centuries before Timur arrived. Situated on the Silk Road, where caravans from China, Persia, Arabia, and Europe converged, Samarkand had been a center of commerce, religion, and knowledge. Previous Islamic dynasties had turned it into a prosperous city, where turquoise domes and bustling markets filled with spices, silk, and precious stones glittered. However, wars between dynasties and the decline of the Yuan dynasty left Samarkand devastated on several occasions. When Timur rose to power, the city was not just a strategic center, but also a symbol of power. Whoever controlled Samarkand could dream of dominating Central Asia. After years of conflict and alliances, Timur solidified his position. In 1370, he chose Samarkand as his capital. This was not just a strategic decision, but a declaration. From this point on, he was no longer a local warlord, but the founder of an empire. Timur began to rebuild Samarkand on an unprecedented scale. He mobilized artisans from all over, from Persia, Syria, and even India, bringing them here to construct palaces, mosques, and magnificent gardens. Many of the great architectural wonders we still admire today, such as the Bibi Khanum Mosque and Gur-e-Amir, are the results of that vision. However, the prosperity of Samarkand was not built on roses, but on the blood of the vanquished. After each conquest, Timur brought thousands of artisans, scholars, and artists back to Samarkand. For him, war was not just about expanding territory, but also a way to collect talent and art to serve his capital. A prime example is after the conquest of Delhi 1398, Timur brought back countless builders, sculptors, and Indian artisans who left a distinct mark on Samarkand's architectural art. But alongside this, Samarkand was also a place that harbored fear. To build these magnificent structures, tens of thousands of prisoners were forced into labor. Thus, the capital was both as radiant as a jewel and shadowed by oppression. Samarkand was not just an administrative capital, but also a cultural and intellectual center. Timur and his successors turned it into a hub for scholars, mathematicians, astronomers, and poets from across the Islamic world. From here, knowledge from Greece, Persia, and India was translated and spread to West Asia and Europe, contributing to the cultural revival of humanity. At the same time, Samarkand also reveals the paradox of Timurandapa's power He was both a ruthless executioner and a great patron of arts and knowledge. The Sityandappa's prosperity is a testament to how he transformed conquest into a tool for building a timeless, brand image. As night falls, looking up at the turquoise domes reflecting the moonlight in the Samarkand sky, one can understand why Timur was called the architect of an empire. But this blue jewel was just the beginning. From Samarkand, Timur would launch horrific campaigns, erecting towers of human skulls and spreading terror from Persia to India, from Syria to Anatolia. And that is the story we will enter in the next part, Blood and Iron, the first campaigns of conquest. The weapon of fear, the strategy of terror. When we look at history, we see many kings and generals used swords, diplomacy, or religion to conquer hearts and minds. But for Timur, there was another, more terrifying weapon: fear. He understood that it was not necessary to kill all his enemies. Just by sowing deep enough terror, an entire region would bow in submission. Timur was not the first to realize the power of psychological terror. Genghis Khan had used the tactic of mass slaughter to make his enemies tremble, but Timur elevated it to an art of war, combining swift military strikes with ruthless destruction to create an image of invincibility. When his army approached, rumors of skull towers and massacres of tens of thousands preceded them. An entire city might surrender immediately just at the mention of the name Timur-Lenk. One of the most horrific examples occurred in 1401, when Timur attacked Baghdad, the ancient center of Islam, once the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. After capturing the city, he ordered the massacre of its population. The Arab historian Ibn Arabja recounted that 90,000 people were killed in a few days, and from the severed heads, his soldiers built 120 towers of skulls around the city. This was not just an act of revenge, but a message: any city that dared to resist Timur could be turned into a giant graveyard. In 1398, Timurandappus' army marched into India and captured the capital, Delhi. Before the battle, he ordered the execution of all prisoners, a number recorded in chronicles as up to 100,000 people. This was a preventive measure, as he feared the prisoners would rebel during the battle. After taking Delhi, Timurandappus' soldiers looted, raped, and killed without mercy. The bustling streets and markets of gold and silver were reduced to ashes. The capital of an Indian Muslim sultanate collapsed in a sea of blood, leaving a horrific memory that would be passed down for hundreds of years. In Syria, famous cities like Aleppo and Damascus also experienced Timurandappus' terror. The populations were massacred, and those who survived were often taken back to Samarkand as slaves or artisans. What is particularly noteworthy is that Timur did not just kill for revenge, but also to send a message. Survivors were intentionally allowed to escape to tell of the horrors, acting as messengers of blood, spreading his reputation faster than any army could. Today, we can look back at these events with a colder perspective. Timurandappus' strategy of terror, though brutal, proved the power of psychology and warfare. He understood that victory lay not only on the battlefield, but also in the minds of men. By sowing fear, he controlled vast territories with astonishing speed. But at the same time, it was this very terror that made his empire lack a stable foundation, for the only loyalty he received was born of fear, not of trust or love. The towers of skulls, the seas of blood, the desolate cities, all were not just isolated events. They are evidence of how Timur turned horror into an effective weapon. But, as we shall see, behind these bloody towers, there was another Timur, one who, while brutal, also had the ambition to build a great cultural center. And that is the paradox: a hand that wielded a sword to kill tens of thousands, while the other hand raised the turquoise domes of Samarkand. The fateful campaigns, the bloody path of conquest. If the towers of skulls and seas of blood were symbols of fear, then Timur and Apis' successive military campaigns were a living testament to his bottomless ambition. Each expedition not only expanded his territory, but also carved the name of the Iron Man into history as a conqueror feared by both East and West. After consolidating his power in Transoxiana, Timur turned his gaze toward Persia, modern-day Iran, a wealthy land fractured by small Islamic states and the remnants of the Ilkhanate. In 1381, he attacked Herat, a prosperous city famous for its art and scholarship. But instead of just destroying it, he also brought its finest artists and scholars back to Samarkand. This was the beginning of a common pattern in Timur and Apis' campaign's destruction for deterrence, but also the collection of elites to build his imperial capital. In the following years, Timur successively subjugated lands from Isfahan and Shiraz to Tabriz. Each campaign left bloody scars. Isfahan, the beautiful city famous for its turquoise domes, once saw a massacre of over 70,000 people simply because its citizens rebelled after surrendering. Not stopping there, he marched into the Caucasus, conquering Armenia and Georgia. These Christian lands became battlegrounds of destruction, where villages were burned, churches destroyed, and the populations enslaved and taken to Central Asia. In 1398, Timur turned his army south, crossing the Hindu Kush into India. His opponent was the Delhi Sultanate, which was weakened by internal conflicts. Before the battle, Timur ordered the massacre of 100,000 prisoners, one of the largest mass killings of his entire career. Upon capturing Delhi, he allowed his soldiers to loot, rape, and murder at will. A city once called the jewel of the subcontinent was turned to ashes. Delhi not only lost its political status, but was haunted by the trauma for centuries of wound in Indian history that was slow to heal. Timur did not stop in India. He returned to the Middle East, where two major powers, the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt and the nascent but rapidly rising Ottoman Empire, became his targets. The most fateful battle was at Ankara 1402, where Timur faced Sultan Bayezid I Yildirim the Thunderbolt. With cunning and patience, Timur besieged, cut off water supplies, and sowed division among the Ottoman coalition. The result: Bayezid was captured alive, and the Ottoman Empire temporarily fell into crisis. This was a landmark victory, not only elevating Timur to the pinnacle of power, but also changing the course of European history. Without this defeat, the Ottomans might have advanced more quickly into the Balkans and posed a deeper threat to the West. Each of Timur and Apis' campaigns followed the same pattern. A region was swept through, its population killed or enslaved, its cities destroyed, and its finest talents brought back to Samarkand. This was the bloody path of conquest, a series of long marches from Persia, the Caucasus, and India to the Middle East and Anatolia. But the price was horrific. Millions of lives were lost, countless local civilizations were erased, and the fear of Timur spread across the Eurasian continent. Today, historians still debate, was Timur a destroyer or an architect of a new order? The answer probably lies in a combination of both. He destroyed to build, spread terror to rule, and created a short-lived empire that left a profound mark on human history. The Battle of Ankara 1402, when Tamerlane broke the Ottomans of Timur and Damascus. Previous campaigns had sown terror across Asia. The Battle of Ankara in 1402 elevated his name to a global stature. This was not just a simple battle, but a turning point that shaped the course of Eastern and Western history for centuries to come. At the end of the 14th century, the two greatest powers in the Middle East were rising in parallel. The Ottoman Empire, under the leadership of Sultan Bayezid I Yildirim the Thunderbolt, a brave warrior who had expanded Ottoman power deep into the Balkans, directly threatening Europe. Timur and Damascus Empire, stretching from Central Asia and Iran to India, now sought to prove itself the master of the entire Islamic world. Both were conquerors who had never known retreat. Conflict between them was inevitable. The control of Anatolia, Asia Minor, the strategic land bridge between East and West. Bayezid I was hot-headed but decisive. He was confident in his elite army, his swift cavalry, and especially the Janissaries, a force of absolutely loyal slave soldiers. Timur was different. He was patient, cunning, and accustomed to using division to defeat his opponents. Before the battle, he shrewdly allied with the Anatolian emirs who resented Ottoman expansion. Many of them turned their coats and defected to Timur when the battle began. On July 28, 1402, the two great armies met on the plain near Ankara. The summer heat was scorching, and the battlefield was vast, with dust obscuring the sky. Timur employed a classic step tactic, dividing his army into several wings to gradually encircle the enemy. He cut off the water supply, leaving the Ottoman army to suffer from thirst and exhaustion. Many of the Turkish allies were dissatisfied with Bayezid, switched to Timur and Damascus' side in the middle of the battle, throwing the Ottoman lines into further chaos. Finally, Timur and Damascus cavalry closed the encirclement, crushing the Ottoman army. Bayezid and his wife, Despina Hatun, were captured alive. It is said that when Bayezid was captured, Timur looked at him and said coldly, "You are a tyrant. God has punished you by my hand." Legend has it that Bayezid was kept in an iron cage, paraded with Timur as a living trophy. While the authenticity of this is debated, the fact is that Bayezid died only a year later in captivity, and the Ottoman Empire fell into a crisis that lasted for over a decade, a period known as the Ottoman Interregnum. The victory at Ankara was Timur and Damascus' zenith. He had broken the rise of the Ottomans, slowing their advance into Europe. Without this defeat, Western cities might have faced a much more formidable Ottoman wave sooner. Affirmed his empire as the dominant superpower in the Asian Islamic world. Spread fear all the way to the courts of Europe, causing Western kings to watch the Iron Man on Damascus' every move. The Battle of Ankara was not just a military victory, but a symphony of strategy, patience, and the ability to exploit human nature. It showed a Timur who knew not only how to use violence, but also how to play the long game of politics. For world history, this was one of those rare moments when the fates of Europe and Asia intersected on the same battlefield, a battle in Anatolia, but its echoes reached as far as Vienna, Paris, and Rome. But it was also after Ankara that Timur-Andapus Empire began to reach its limits. Though he could capture a sultan, he could not stop the wheels of history. After this peak, the question arose, could Timur-Andapus dream of absolute power last forever, or would it soon crumble under the weight of its own overextension? Part 8. The Man Behind the Warrior. When we speak of Timur or Tamerlane, we often envision the image of an Iron Man, a brutal warrior, a spreader of terror from Delhi to Anatolia. But behind the hardened shell of a conqueror, there was also a man with beliefs, contradictions, ambitions, and even weaknesses. To fully understand this historical figure, we must delve into his inner world and the lesser-told aspects of his life. Timur came from a minor tribe in Transoxiana, which lacked the great power of the direct descendants of Genghis Khan. To build his legitimacy, he positioned himself as the heir to both Mongol and Islamic traditions, always claiming that his campaigns were holy wars against infidels or treacherous lords. In Timur-Andapus' heart, religious faith and the thirst for power were intertwined. He often had magnificent mosques, madrasas schools, and mausoleums built to both demonstrate his piety and reinforce his image as a divinely appointed ruler. Few know that Timur was a man who valued his clan. He married multiple times, and these marital alliances were both political and a reflection of his attachment to his family network. His most famous wife, Sarimulk Khanum, was a direct descendant of Genghis Khan. Through her, Timur further strengthened his legitimacy to rule. Though a conqueror, Timur also had pride and deep paternal feelings. He hoped his descendants would carry on his legacy and often placed them in key positions in the army or court. But this very division of power later became a seed of conflict after his death. This is one of Timur-Andapus' greatest paradoxes. On the battlefield, he erected towers of human skulls to sow fear. But in his capital, Samarkand, he was a great patron of art and architecture. He invited the finest artisans from Persia, India, and the Middle East to build palaces, gardens, and temples. The result was that Samarkand became the glittering jewel of Central Asia, described by Western travelers as a magnificent city on par with Baghdad or Constantinople. This shows that Timur had both a desire to dominate with the sword and a wish to leave a lasting legacy that transcended violence. Timur was known to be intelligent and patient, but also incredibly tough. He believed that political power had to be paired with fear that subjects and enemies would only submit when they were terrified. But alongside his ruthlessness, he was also a skilled diplomat, knowing how to use gifts, marriages, and promises to win people over. Persian historians described Timur as having a special charisma, always able to persuade with his words. He could sit for hours discussing philosophy and strategy with scholars, and then the very next day lead his army into a merciless slaughter without hesitation. When we look at Timur, we see a series of paradoxes: a lame warrior who led conquering armies across thousands of miles, a mass murderer who was also a patron of a brilliant civilization, a bloodthirsty king who was also a loving and proud family man. These contradictions not only make Timur an unpredictable figure, but also make him a symbol of the 14th century, an era where the line between civilization and barbarism was always thin. When we tell the story of the man behind the warrior, we understand that history is not just about numbers and battles. but also about the ambitions, beliefs, and frailties of human beings. Timur is proof that great historical figures are always more complex than the simple images posterity often assigns to them. Within him, there was both light and darkness, and it is this interplay that helps us fully understand the legacy he left behind: a short-lived but resonant empire, a magnificent capital built on blood and terrors. Death, the tomb, and the curse. There is a truth in history: the greater the figure, the more their death is shrouded in legends. And Tamerlane, the Iron Man of Central Asia, was no exception. In 1404, in his late 60s, Timur-Endapus' dream of conquest had not waned. He harbored the ambition to attack the Ming dynasty in China, the only mighty empire remaining outside his control. That winter, Timur-Endapus' massive army gathered at Otrar, on the banks of the Darya River, but nature was not on his side. The harsh cold old age and a debilitating illness struck down the conqueror. On February 18, 1405, Timur died. The army had not even left Central Asia before it lost its leader. His sudden death was like a blow that halted the whirlwind of conquest, and it also opened the cracks in the vast empire he had left behind. Timur-Endapus' body was brought back to Samarkand and interred in the Gur-e-Amir, a magnificent mausoleum he himself had commissioned. The tomb was not just a resting place, but a symbol of power and pride. The architecture of Gur-e-Amir reflects a cultural fusion: a brilliant blue dome, intricately carved walls, and Arabic calligraphy praising God. The mausoleum is both a testament to Timur-Endapus' desire to build the legacy and a reminder that all glory ultimately ends in death. On Timur-Endapus' tombstone, historians recorded a chilling inscription: "Whoever disturbs my tomb will unleash an invader more terrible than I for centuries." This inscription became a legend, fueling fear and curiosity in later generations. And then this curse was recalled in a terrifying way in the 20th century. On June 20, 1941, a team of Soviet archaeologists excavated the Gur-e-Amir mausoleum. 3 days later, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, the bloodiest conflict in human history. This coincidence fueled the belief that Tamerlane-Endapus' curse was real. Many even believe that when his remains were reinterred with Islamic rites in late 1942, the Soviet Red Army turned the tide at Stalingrad, a decisive turning point in World War II. Was it just a coincidence, or does the ghost of Tamerlane still haunt history? Whether one believes in the curse or not, the story surrounding Timur-Endapus' death and tomb holds a special value. It reflects the intersection of history and legend, where truth, religious belief, and human imagination merged to create collective memory. Timur died, but his legacy did not disappear. Samarkand remains a testament to his grand architectural vision, and the curse on his tomb, true or false, still sends a shiver down the spine of posterity, reminding us that the power of history lies not just in battles, but in the stories that are passed down through the centuries. The legacy and paradox of a legend. Perhaps no figure in Central Asian history has left a legacy as brilliant and contradictory as Tamerlane. He died over 6 centuries ago, but his name still sparks debate. Was he a nation-building hero or a bloodthirsty destroyer? Looking at Samarkand, we clearly see the light side of Timur-Endapus' legacy. Structures like the Gur-e-Amir, the Bibi Khanam Mosque, and the Registan Square with their turquoise domes and intricately carved tiles transform the city into the jewel of the East. It wasn't opposed to just architecture. Timur also patronized science and art. Under his reign, astronomers like Allah Beg Timurandapas' grandson laid the groundwork for world-leading astronomical observations. This shows that, behind the bloody battles, there was a dream of building an enduring civilization. However, with the light came the darkness. Each of Timurandapas' campaigns often left behind towers of skulls, a mark of terror built from tens of thousands of victims. Baghdad, Isfahan, Delhi, all became witnesses to horrific massacres. Therefore, in the memory of many peoples, he is not a patron of the arts, but a spreader of destruction. That legacy is a wound that has not yet healed in the region Andapas history. Timur was a living paradox, a lame warrior who never lost a battle, a spreader of death who also nurtured civilization, a man who dreamed of rebuilding the Mongol Empire but created a unique identity for Central Asia. This makes his image complex. In modern-day Uzbekistan, Timur is celebrated as a national hero, with statues erected and streets named after him. But in the memories of Iran or India, he remains a specter of devastation. Tamerlane did not just influence his own century. The weakening of the Ottomans after their defeat at Ankara set Middle Eastern history in a different direction in Europe. The slowing of the Ottoman pressure allowed Constantinople to survive for another half-century. In the East, the collapse that Timur left behind paved the way for the Mughal Empire, his descendants, to rise in India and leave behind wonders like the Taj Mahal. It can be said that Timur was both an architect of dreams and a nightmare of humanity. The legend of him lives not only in the stones of Samarkand or the blood-stained pages of history, but also in the way we reflect on power, war, and the fragility of civilization. And that is the paradox of a legend as a single person, and both build and destroy, and it is this that makes Timurandapas' legacy immortal, yet haunting. We have walked together through the bloody and glorious paths of one of the most controversial figures in human history, Timur, or Tamerlane. We have seen a lame man from the harsh steppes who challenged the world with his iron will. We have seen Samarkand rise to become the glittering jewel of the East, but we have also witnessed towering skulls built from the corpses of the vanquished. History always presents us with paradoxes. Timur was both a destroyer and a builder. He sowed death, but also nurtured art, science, and architecture. It is this contradiction that makes his image a vivid lesson. Power, when unchecked, can both build glory and leave a darkness that lasts for centuries. When we look back at what Timur left behind, perhaps the most important question is not was he a hero or a villain, but rather what can we, the people of today, learn from his rise and fall? Will we let power, ambition, and fear shape the world as Timur once did, or will we choose a different path, a path of construction without the need for destruction?